ever hear his voice and like what he's gonna say to you when he's done? Your games are done.
Jesus, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can already hear it 100%. The ravings of a madman. The pre-moves, I know he did not enjoy. And then in the second game, when you pushed that F pawn, I'd never seen it before. I played so many Vienna games, but I've never seen the F pawn push, so I didn't know how to react at all. And I missed a huge sequence if I went over to the H file, and I know he was screaming. He probably threw his coffee cup on the ground and just flipped over his table.
Sorry, you guys, I muted myself. I was finishing my food. I muted myself. My apologies. Apologies. Gomennasai. All right, so D4, F5. Again, interesting opening choice by Turbo Fisto by Charlie. I don't really dislike it. I think it makes sense. It's pretty reasonable. So E3 here. Knight F6, Knight C3, G6, Knight F3, Bishop G7, Knight G5, castles, Bishop C4, E6, H4. Now, this is one of the issues I have with generally when you play the Dutch opening. It's like, it's not like what MrBeast does here is great, to be clear, but it's very dangerous if your opponent tries to go all in and attack you on the queen side. So even though I don't necessarily love the idea, I think it's or objectively I don't love the idea. I think it was a great decision for this game. So bishop e2, knight 6, h5 takes, bishop takes, queen g5. Very good move by Charlie, by the way. Does not take this pawn on h5 because then white can play queen takes h5, and you're really in deep trouble with white having total control over this open h file with the rook and the queen. So very, very dangerous. So instead, after bishop takes h5, queen takes g5 is what Charlie plays. Now MrBeast plays a move that I don't necessarily love overall, but it's a great move considering the situation, which is pawn to e4, because what you do is you discover the queen, you fossilize it with your bishop by pushing the pawn forward, and now Charlie actually blunders by playing queen takes pawn. There are a couple things that he could have done that were better objectively. Probably simplest was to play queen to e7 here, because when he when he goes queen takes g2, it looks good because it hits the rook, but you can also just go like queen e7 potentially, or queen d8. Very simple moves, get the queen out of the way. And the problem is white tried to fossilize you by pushing the pawn. When you move the queen, there's no fossil and your bishop is still under attack along with your pawn. So because of that, you end up in a lot of trouble, because if you like move your bishop, I just eat the juicer. I open up the the file for my rook, and secondly, there's a lot of pressure towards your pawn in the center. So I think it is important to keep that in mind. That being said, I understand queen g2 looks very attractive. You attack the rook, the bishop's still under attack from the pawn, and it looks like game over. But here, to his credit, MrBeast played bishop to f3. Really nice move, and now it traps the queen. What happens is the queen protects the bishop. So if you take, I just take back with my queen on d1, and if you go back, I eat your queen with my other bishop, and so your queen is actually completely trapped here. So he goes queen takes rook. And now after bishop takes, white is very simply up a queen for a rook. That being said, black has some compensation. He has this nice sort of pawn palace in the center of the board, and it's playable. Bishop e3, rook d8 was played here. Good moves, queen e2, e5. Now this is where Charlie kind of hesitated, and he probably should have just taken the pawn, because after white castles, he probably was worried about the this whole file here. But first of all, there's knight to b3, creating a fossil with the check, and then you eat the queen. Secondly, you could also play a move like e5 here to support the knight, and then move your bishop to the center of the board, and black is probably doing relatively okay in this position. Instead, he plays e5. Now here, MrBeast goes bishop h6. A better move here would have been to play pawn to d5. Just keep the pawn on the board, because after bishop h6 in the game, black can just take this free pawn in the center. So sometimes when you're dealing with pins like this, where you can't take a pawn because your queen hangs, you can push a pawn forward to step out of all the tricks, and the pawn is very safe here with the knight on c3 and the queen on d2. But instead, he plays bishop h6, and now here Charlie takes on h6, which is a move that I really don't like, because one thing that's important here is when you look at this big pawn clump, if black takes on d4 and white trades, the king is very safe. White cannot do anything really on the dark squares towards where the king is. Queen g5 is obviously a move, but it's not really a great move. Whereas when you trade, you sort of give away your protection around the king, and if white can castle the king and go bishop g2 and rook to h1, white will be doing very well here. So after queen h6, Turbo takes, or Charlie takes, knight b5, rook d7. Now Charlie castles, or Jimmy castles here, MrBeast castles. Charlie plays knight b4. Not the best move. What he should have done here was realize that in this position everything is very stable here. He has a very nice connect 4 pawn chain from h7 to e4. The knight holds a pawn, rook holds a pawn, so you could have just pushed this pawn, attack the knight. Knight can't capture because you recapture. Knight goes back, you recapture. So knight has to go to like a3 here. And now after say something like b5, bishop b7, and bringing the rook to the center of the board, your big pawns in the center, you almost have a massive flying V. Like if you could get this is like, I don't know what you call this, but you see these jumbo pawns in the center of the board. They look really good. They create some kind of formation from a game. Someone should ask XQC what this looks like, but it feels like some formation that you get in some kind of other video game or something. It's like a gigantic pirate ship or something, I don't know, but it's really good. So like the thing is, if you get to this position, for example, and white goes back, you play b5, you have this really good structure. Also, for example, bishop g2, bishop b7, rook h1 does not attack the pawn because the rook holds the base and the pawns all hold each other hand in hand going down to pawn to e4. So if he had done this, it would have been good. Instead he plays knight b4. Objectively not the best, because here white can take, and the problem is once you lose this pawn in the center, you still have this diagonal closed, but the open lines really do support the white queen a lot more. Instead he goes king to b1. D3 is played. Why are you playing? We want to see you play. Most of my chat actually was responsible for the original idea of Pogchamps, and I think many people are fans of very different content creators who are in this event, so we are covering it. So D3 now here, MrBeast plays F3. Now objectively it's a losing move and it makes sense, but what he should have done was traded and then gone F3, because the one thing you realize here is the pawn chain. The pawns really restrict this white bishop. Let's say black were to let's say push a pawn, you'll notice the scope. Look at how open this bishop is on this long diagonal, whereas here the pawns are kind of holding each other, so your bishop on h1 never gets any scope. So cd3 would have been better. Instead MrBeast tries f3 first, and he blunders pawn takes pawn with a big fork, and unfortunately the pawn is also supported by the knight, so after you move the king, black just takes and it's a checkmate. So a very sort of choppy game for Charlie. That being said, I felt that once he got out of the opening phase of the game, he really put it all together, and it was a very nice victory for him. So very nice first win in game 1. And now let's move on to game 2 between Charlie and MrBeast. Okay, so let's move to game 2. Okay, so in the second game, Charlie plays with the white pieces. E4, E5, knight C3. Charlie continues to play the Vienna. I think he originally worked on this with Levy, and he's also worked on it with Danya as well. Very sort of compact opening system. You can go bishop c4, g3, or f4 depending. So it's very compact, very thematic, and I think it's a great opening choice for Charlie. So f5 was played by MrBeast. Pawn takes. And now here Jimmy plays d5. Very sort of bold. He could have played like knight to f6 here, which is a move. Again, one of the big issues with pushing a pawn to the left of your king, f7, f5, or f2, f4, you always have to be wary of these long diagonal checks by the queen, for white or black for that matter. So takes d5. Now here Charlie plays pawn to d4. MrBeast plays knight c6. Now again, queen h5 is objectively best. The funny thing is, after queen h5, king e7, though, you don't have a knockout blow, and black is going to play knight to f6, attacking your queen and developing the knight next move. So it's not actually so trivial here. So instead he plays d4, knight to c6, pawn takes pawn, and now d4 is played by MrBeast. And this is where Charlie could have played queen to h5 here, and he would have been winning the game, because if you go king e7, there's bishop g5, and if you go g6, white can take here. And if you take the knight, actually there's a very dirty trick. You do not take this pawn, but you actually push, because you fossilize the king here, and the rook is under attack on h8, and you actually will just make a second queen and win the game immediately here. And as you guys see from the evaluation bar, it is plus 31 here if this were to happen in the game. So that would be really bad, which is why queen h5 is a good move. That being said, Charlie plays knight e2. Very nice move as well. Just redevelop the knight, put it closer to the center, and bishop f5, knight f3. Good move. Both knights attack the pawn on d4. And while queen h5 was better, I do like what Charlie was doing, generally speaking, and it makes a lot of sense here. So now knight b4 is played. Knight takes pawn, queen d7. Charlie plays a3. Beautiful, beautiful move. Nothing more I can say. Maybe c3 is very slightly better just because there's not a target on the light square for the bishop, but a3 is just as good. So now MrBeast takes, not the best move. Again, very tough position to play. Probably should go back, but here white can trade. Go bishop d3, something like queen e6, castles, and after a move like queen to e2, white is clearly better. You have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and black has 1 2 3 4 5, so it's very, very good for white. Instead, MrBeast goes knight takes c2, trades the queen's castles, but after Charlie finds bishop to d2 here, you see white has 2 bishops, 2 knights. Black has 2 bishops and a knight, so black is behind, but black is missing one of his ponies here. So he trades h5, knight g5. Really good move by Charlie. Tries to go for the classic fork on f7 of the 2 rooks. Rook d7, e6, rook e7, bishop d4, rook e8 takes. Now here Charlie could have actually come up with a neat idea, which is knight f7, attacks the rook. Rook can't go up because here you take, and after rook h7 you actually have a very neat move, bishop to d3, kind of trapping the rook in a sense. Both squares, it gets eaten by the knight. Sure, black can go g6, but again you can take, and after a move like rook g7, go knight to d6 with the classic fossil. Bishop takes knight, and now you take the rook, and white has 1 2 3 4. Black has 1 2 3, so black is down by 1 clean rook, and white is winning. So it's a neat idea to be aware of, that something like knight f7, rook h7, bishop d3 does exist here. So here bishop takes f8 is played, bishop c4, rook g2, rook f1, rook g3, and now here Charlie plays knight f3. I think he was just tunneling a little bit. He could have obviously taken the rook. Instead he goes knight f3, rook g6, rook a to e1, and now MrBeast goes c6, Charlie goes e7. Very, very precise move, puts the rook behind the passed pawn and tries to make a queen. So knight f6, rook e6, rook e8, rook e1, b5, bishop d3, and now rook g3 is the final blunder by MrBeast, and after pawn takes rook, Charlie is just winning. Not much more needs to be said about the game. MrBeast ends up resigning here. Obviously he's losing. Charlie has 2 rooks, a bishop and a knight. He only has a lone rook on the board. So I mean, Charlie wins a pretty good game, moves up to 2 out of 2 in his 2 matches, doing very well. He will have 1 more match against Ludwig, which will be a very exciting match. It should determine the number 1 and number 2 seeds coming out of Group D. But again, we remains to be seen what happens, because of course those of you who were here for Pogchamps 1, you will remember the final of the consolation bracket was indeed between Ludwig and MoistCr1TiKaL. So it's going to be fun. We'll see what happens, but for now Charlie pretty good, pretty solid. Both these matches he was supposed to win against Code Miko and against MrBeast. He's been pretty stable. Today was a little bit shaky at times, but overall when he needed to, he found a lot of critical moves. So it's very, very good. And with that, I'm gonna wrap up my commentary of this match, and we will go back to the live coverage, and let's listen in.
The rooks are
Hey, DJ Melee for the prime.
interesting situation. I just put it there because we were on chess.com and it was counting down to 0 seconds, and I thought they would cut, and I thought it'd be funny because no one would understand what's going on, but they didn't cut. Per usual, fucking up the timing, chess.com producers. Come on, you just gotta cut. I'm the timing guy. You're ruining my thing. What's the point of a clock? It's a farce. This clock is bullshit. Anyway, I ain't no simp, so queen's A tier. That's it. That's a fact. Not S tier because I'm not a simp.
Isn't that TOS?